Okay. So this morning we had a great opportunity to hear from Eddie Martucci on Akili Labs about digital therapeutics. And the promise of them is actually quite astounding and are just coming to be realized. And as any new industry can attest to, the challenges to building something revolutionary can be a roller coaster. I'd like to welcome an innovative pioneer in the arena of digital therapeutics, along with our fabulous moderator, Amir Kalali. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
What's up, guys?
Good afternoon, everyone. So as Jill mentioned, actually, my very good friends Eddie and Arsha, they're all very close friends of mine, did a great session this morning. I think most of you were there. Although I felt they didn't have that much time, I didn't think they addressed some elephants in the room, quite honestly. So for those of you who've been following digital therapeutics, which is probably most of you, we've had kind of a couple of elephants in the room, right? The last year, we still are waiting for at-scale reimbursement for digital therapeutics. And you've all probably read in the news some what could be seen as great setbacks for the sort of pioneering digital therapeutics companies at the end of last year. What's interesting to me is to me, digital therapeutics 1.0 colliding with the healthcare system. So when you're trying to build a whole new paradigm of reimbursement, distribution, and you're not really integrated into the system necessarily, it's a bit of a problem. You probably know Akili as a company, based on a very robust science, has done FDA work, and they've taken a different route to commercialization. So I think that's something I'm sure we'll have more sessions on. And I think talking with Charlie today, where he's in a completely different area of digital therapeutics, I just want to give that context. I think there are elephants in the room right now about the commercial success of digital therapeutics. Personally, I'm very optimistic about it. I just think it's not surprising when you're trying to introduce a whole new way of thinking to a healthcare system that you're going to have problems. So
hardball questions. We're looking for hardball questions today.
So let's start with just why have you started the digital therapeutics company? How did you even do that?
Well, first off, it's great to see everybody here, and this is an awesome conference and an exciting place to be. I founded FitScript and created GlucoZone because there's a public health crisis happening right now, and it's an epidemic, and it's diabetes. And it's an epidemic here in the United States, but also globally. And the reality is, for patients living with diabetes, the standard of care is not working. Since 2005, over 40 pharmaceutical therapies have been FDA approved and brought to the diabetes market. And not only have diabetes results not gotten any better, they've actually gotten worse. There are more patients from a percentage perspective with out-of-control diabetes than there were in 2005. There's more patients with severely out-of-control diabetes, A1Cs of 9.0 or above, than in 2005. And disruption is needed. And, there's a major issue of therapeutic inertia right now in the diabetes space. And the opportunities for disruption, I think, and we think, my company, we think, are in the non-pharmaceutical aspects of diabetes care. Okay. And, so when you look at successful diabetes management, it's universally recognized that it comes in the form of a treatment triangle: medication, nutrition, and exercise. Okay? Billions of dollars have been invested in the medication component of diabetes management, and according to the American Diabetes Association, it's not working. Okay? Huge reality check for healthcare. This is not working. When you look at that standard of care and you start to identify, well, where are the gaps in the standard of care, it's clear to us that the gap in the standard of care for diabetes revolves around physical activity and exercise. Okay. And while everybody knows that exercise is good for diabetes, exercise is different for people living with diabetes, starting with the need to test their blood sugar and manage their medication. And depending on what a person's blood sugar level is, it may or may not be safe to exercise. It may or may not be safe to perform certain types of exercise. When you start to factor in medication profiles, types of diabetes, physical limitations, actual things like the weather, The reality is you can't just tell somebody with type 2 diabetes that's on insulin and metformin and has neuropathy in their feet and a bum knee to go for a walk. That's just not a scenario for success, yet that is what the current standard of care really is. So we are trying to address that gap in the standard of care with a digital therapy. And
so let me get that right. So
yeah.
Achille will tell you that they have science-based kind of treatment on its own. Pear will tell you they're, on their first iteration, it's app plus drug, right? So you're telling me that you are really positioning exercise as a therapeutic, correct?
Yeah, so I think that digital therapeutics is still being defined. My kind of take on digital therapeutics and the real kind of test is, can you prescribe an app instead of a drug to achieve a meaningful clinical outcome? And if the answer is yes, that's a digital therapeutic in my mind. And that's going to...
Why did you say instead of? Can it be as well as, or is that your definition, it has to be instead of? Or?
I think that the opportunity is there, the instead of.
Okay.
I think that that's what patients want.
Okay.
Patients don't want more data. Patients want to, in the case of diabetes, patients want to reduce, reverse, or take back control of their life. Reduce, reverse, or control their diabetes. Okay? They don't want to take more drugs. There's nothing more depressing than having a feeling that the only way I can be in control of my health is if I have to take a drug. Our whole country is in a crisis right now because of the medication lifestyle that has essentially become the de facto way of managing behavioral health and chronic issues. And it has to change. And that's what everybody here is about. Digital health is about changing the status quo. And so I think that over the course of the next couple of years, companies like our company, companies like Achille, companies like Pear, all of the other kind of ones that are well known in this digital therapy space are going to be showing how you can use technology to achieve a clinical outcome instead of a drug. I really think that that's the case.
So where do you think there's actually quite a few, I would say, quite well-known companies in the diabetes space that are doing things different to you, right? I'm sure you're very familiar with all of them. Can you put it in context for us where you might sit compared to the rest of that ecosystem?
So I would say that we are taking a fundamentally different approach than most of the digital health companies in diabetes. We are not looking to be a care management platform. We are not looking to replace providers either. We are identifying and addressing a very specific patient pain point. And I think that that's a really important thing for every digital health company to keep in mind. When you're building a 21st century digital therapy company, you have to start with the patient pain point and keep the patients first. And everything else flows from that because that is your why. If you don't have a compelling why, first off, it's going to be very challenging to get patients to adopt your technology. But really, secondly, when you talk about the whole overall environment of patients, payers, and providers, you need to be offering something to the table that doesn't really exist and addresses a very specific patient pain point. So there are, I guess what I'll say is, I think that all of the digital health companies in this space are part of the transition to digital health becoming the standard of care for diabetes. But in our case, we are pioneering the prescription of an app instead of a drug. And we're taking it there, and we're challenging the diabetes community. We're challenging healthcare in general with that. It's like, no, stop turning to pharmaceuticals for every single aspect of diabetes. Stop turning to pharmaceuticals for every single challenge related to behavioral health.
So would you argue that for everyone with type 2, or do you think some people would still need to have medication?
So obviously, medication has an important place, okay? And this is part of working with providers, not trying to replace providers, okay? Right now, patients, the diabetes epidemic is crazy. I came across this stat the other day. Somebody knew, this is crazy, every 6 seconds, somebody is walking out of their doctor's office having been newly diagnosed with diabetes. Okay, every 6 seconds. That means that basically in the last 10 minutes that we've been sitting here, 600 people have walked out of their doctor's office. Okay? And their doctor has given them basically one of three things. They've given them a prescription for medication, which should be done based on an assessment of what is the cause of their hyperglycemia. Okay? Or they're saying, go get some exercise. Okay? With the prescription of medication, it's supported by, starting with an actual piece of paper. You take that piece of paper, you go to a Walgreens or a CVS. There's a specialist and a professional there that can actually manage you through that process. When it comes to exercise, which by the way is recognized clinically as the preferred therapy, the actual physiology behind diabetes is addressed most effectively with an increase in muscle mass. It's a pat on the butt, basically. Go get them. Okay?
So you're really providing the clinician with a tool to give a very structured,
yes,
supportive kind of prescription to help that aspect of the management of the diabetes patient.
Yes, and it's a gap in the standard of care. And I think that that is what that's the opportunity for digital therapeutics, and I think it's a patient-first approach.
Now, are you going to expand into nutrition as kind of the third leg, or are you pretty much focused on the exercise part?
No, there are wonderful nutrition programs out there for diabetes. Okay, what's clear to us when you look at that standard of care, the huge gap is in the activity and exercise piece, and our goal is to build a platform that can partner with nutritional companies, that can work appropriately with medications to actually complete the treatment triangle.
So in the 3 minutes we have left,
yes,
I began by saying that we've had some challenges trying to have digital therapeutics really integrated into the current healthcare distribution system. Can you talk about how you see how digital therapeutics companies in the 21st century can actually get integrated into the system? What are your thoughts about that?
Yes, so there's 3 things. These are really practical things I think everyone in this room should think about. The first one is, if you're going to build a successful digital therapeutics product, you have to start with the patients. And it has to be an easy-to-use application that's accessible via how they normally conduct their business, usually the phone. Underneath that, you have to have healthcare-grade infrastructure. And that's a challenge, because you can't hack HIPAA, you can't hack high-trust certification. If you're working with the FDA, you have to have totally lock-solid data that's representing your findings, okay? And the reality is those are 2 very different skill sets. Building an easy-to-use app is very different than the architecture required to actually become part of the standard of care in healthcare. The second thing is building something that providers can embrace, not be replaced by. The way we've kind of addressed that challenge is something we call Glucosone Pro. We have taken the step now of creating a certification where every single hospital in America can become a certified glucosone provider. We've taken the step with Glucosone Pro to offer a certification for every single piece of fitness infrastructure in this country. Our goal is to be a digital bridge between providers, patients, and the fitness infrastructure of the country. The last piece that's hard and a challenge, and I'll challenge everybody here to think about this here, is working with academic institutions, okay? Very important that digital therapeutics start to become part of the curriculum that providers and doctors are being trained on, so that basically when they actually become licensed, they're familiar with these approaches and actually have the confidence, because they've learned about it, that this is something that I can and should be considering when I'm working with my patients.
Well, I completely agree those 3 things are practical things to think about as we try and integrate digital therapeutics into the actual healthcare system. Can we all thank Charlie? I think we had a very interesting conversation.
Thank you, Amir.